Hello, folks. I thought I'd comment on. I just watched John Robson's very grumpy, very, but humorously so as he is, very boomer-based evaluation of guitar trends. I think the video is something like 5 guitar trends that leave me cold, or stuff you can't get on with in the guitar world. Now, being a Gen Xer, I'm not quite as old, but I'm wondering if I'm just as grouchy. So let me consider the 5 things that he talked about, if I can remember them, and see if I agree with them. The first thing that he talks about is relicking, and talks about the trend that started by Keith Richards of dinging up his guitars, throwing keys at them, and all that sort of stuff. This one's easy. I do agree with him. I'm on board with this one. Don't like relicking. Have never really sought out relic guitars. I've never kept them when I've bought them. I've sold them on. Have never done my own relicking. I'm not interested. If a guitar takes on a used appearance because of gigging or playing, that's one thing. But to simulate and fake that appearance synthetically, I don't understand it at all. I don't know why people want to do that. I don't know why that's important to people. I think if you love a guitar and you play it and you take it out all the time, it's going to get dinged up. There's no reason to fast track that process and fake it. It doesn't look right anyway. A lot of the relic guitars don't look like they're really aged. You can tell someone has done it, superficially to the guitar. Trying to fake years and years of belt buckle rash on the back of an acoustic, or sweat peeling off the finish on the neck of an old Guild. You can't do it to where it looks, to the keen eye anyway, to be authentic. It looks fake. So I absolutely agree with that. I don't understand why somebody would want to buy a new Telly or Strat and do that to it. Because they think they're getting some street cred or something in the guitar community for it. Absolutely don't understand that at all. And if I were a guitar maker, which I'm not, I'm a restoration guy, but I wouldn't really offer those kinds of finishes, because I just think it's a form of lying, isn't it? It's artificial and unnecessary. So that one, I'm going to be the grumpy old Gen Xer on that one, and follow suit and say, I absolutely agree. No relicking. The second one, I am in 2 minds about. He talks about the FX craze, how guitarists are absolutely enamored with every single pedal, every single multi-effects processor that comes out, and just own too many and buy too many, and are absolutely, pulverizing their signal chain with all kinds of stuff. And losing track of what a guitar should sound like. I'm going to differ slightly. I'm going to agree on a level and say yes, guitarists are fetishists, and they do tend to chase all the latest and greatest equipment. They're gear hoarders. A lot of them anyway, not all of them. Some are purists. However, I will say that there are certain guitarists and guitar styles that do really well with lots of effects. I think of guitarists like Michael Brook, who does sort of, very sort of new agey atmospheric guitar style, something called infinite guitar. And he gets a lot of really cool sounds and a unique style out of lots and lots of processing gear. I think of The Edge when he came out in the early U2 albums, the way he used delay like no one else. I think in the YouTube guitar community, I think of Chords of Orion chap, who, his whole point of his channel is to examine all the different things you can do with guitars and all the ways you can use effects. And some of his music's really cool. I really like it. It's atmospheric, it's relaxing. Sometimes it's, almost sacred in flavor. Very contemplative, meditative, that sort of thing. And so I think there are certain things that people do with effects that make them worthwhile. Think of what was it, 2 or 3 albums that Robert Fripp did with Brian Eno? No Pussyfooting, I think, was one. And then there was a couple they did. I can't remember the titles. It's another thing about my age. But absolutely fantastic playing by Robert Fripp on there, using, his Frippatronic layout of stuff. So there's a lot of really interesting and good work done in that field. There's a lot of bad, awful work done as well, where guitars just sound like cheap keyboards. So I agree on some level that guitarists are more concerned about effects and having the latest gear than they are about perfecting their playing, which is probably where their emphasis should be. However, I'm not going to go all the way boomer and say, ban effects, to make people play with a pure signal and learn how to play properly. Because I think there is some great work being done by some really fantastic guitarists and innovators. So I'm about halfway on that one. I think the third one, he talks about all of the plus string guitars. So the craze started by Steve Vai for the 7-string guitar, which now becomes 7, 8-string, 10-string, 12-string, not traditional acoustic 12-string, but the big fat neck additional string electric guitars. Mostly used in metal, but I've seen them used elsewhere. Again, I'm going to go halfway on this. I think it's become sort of stereotypical and cliche in the metal world, with the chugging and the djent, all that sort of down-tuned sound has become copied to the nth degree, and it's just sort of, no longer novel and perhaps even interesting in the hands of many, many people. However, there are many plus string traditions that outside of metal. I'm thinking of the Russian 7-string guitars, of which I have one, which are tuned completely different to a conventional guitar, and offer a wildly different style and flavoring in the acoustic guitar world than anything else out there. There are Sardinian guitars, I can't remember the name of them, somebody will tell me in the comments, that have additional strings that are really interesting. There are harp guitars. There are a couple of harp guitar players on YouTube that have a traditional 6-string guitar with the harp bass appendage on the bottom of the guitar, and they do some absolutely gorgeous music. Really, really interesting, different flavored music from having those additional strings. I love playing my baritone. I love having those bass notes on the guitar. So I can see how, not just for chugging, but how some people might want to have an additional lower B or something like that on a guitar to, get into the bass and cello sort of spectrum of the orchestra. So I'm going to go halfway on that. I think it's overdone, overblown, and it's become, stereotypical in the way that it's used, very cliche. But we can't forget about all of the traditions and all of the styles that have been added and augmented by the adoption and the extension of the 6-stringed guitar. There are examples out there that I haven't even mentioned. I'm sure there are a lot that you can point out to me. But I can't rule it out, because there are some really, really fabulous genres of music springing up that involve multi-stringed guitars. So, I'm going to say I can't follow all the way on that one. Also, the alternate tunings. I don't think that was a category, but it's something that he railed against. Occasionally, he used the open G tuning of Keith Richards for a certain sound. However, most of the alternate tunings he had no interest in. Again, I'm going to disagree with that as well, because although there are some people that, are perhaps too obsessed with alternate tunings, and their music tends to be all about that rather than what they're playing. However, there are so many styles, genres, pockets of music. You think of, Hawaiian slack key playing. You think of, the alternate tunings that were started by all the fingerstyle guys that sort of gave birth to that whole sound. The early players like Leo Kottke, Michael Hedges, they used a lot of alternate tunings. I don't think they started Dadgad. I think that started with the folky players, going back to Davy Graham, Bert Jansch, John Renbourn, those guys. That scene, I think, popularized Dadgad. And I think there's some really interesting acoustic music done with that tuning. So I'm not going to follow and say, I've got no time for alternate tunings, only standard tuning. Even though I play in standard tuning 95% of the time, I do think there is a call once in a while for some sort of alternate tuning. If you're playing slide, or if you're looking for a different flavor, or you want to play something out of the major minor paradigm, and you find a tuning that sort of starts dealing with microtones or something like that, you can come up with some really interesting stuff. I'm all about composition, and I'm more of a recording musician than a live musician. So experimentation for me, if it achieves a result, something interesting to listen to, is a worthwhile pursuit without it becoming too fetishized. I think alternate tunings can be used sparingly and interestingly for additional flavor and different composition techniques. So even though I don't spend most of my time in alternate tuning, I really admire people that are proficient with different tunings and produce music that is unique. So yeah, that's one I'm going to slightly disagree with. The fourth one was really interesting. He talks about vintage guitars having no interest for him. Overpriced vintage guitars, chasing the holy grail guitars, spending all of your money on guitars that don't give you much more than just a really well set up guitar at an affordable price. I agree a lot with what he said in this. I think some people, the brand snobs annoy me. The people that will only talk and play and consider Gibson, Fender, Martin, the top 6 brands, and everything else is rubbish. I think they are dinosaurs. I think they, their time has come and gone, because there's so many different brands that have come along. There's so many brands that have come along that have sort of destroyed that. And, we live in a world now, you might spend $13,000 on a Gibson and it might not be 5 times better than a $2,000 Epiphone or Charvel or whatever. Price isn't a gauge of how good or bad something is. Marketing should not influence how you feel about instruments or your buying patterns. So I agree on that level. However, people who look for vintage guitars that have the means, that want to overpay, and are going to play them and use them, I can't fault that. I have a 66 Martin, I have my 2 Yaris, I have an American Fender Strat that I've used extensively on recordings, that has a fabulous neck and a fabulous sound. It's not my favorite guitar, but it's a damn good guitar. So, for somebody that wants that all the time, that's going to be their main axe, and that's what they're chasing. I think that's fine. I myself pick them up where I can, where I can afford them, but I don't seek them out. I'm not going to overpay for them. And I do think there's plenty in the sort of um, medium echelon of musical instruments. You know, your Seagulls, your Breedloves, your Blue Ridge. We've had many on this channel. You know, the Yamaha CF guitars, the Fender Paramount guitars. All these are under 1,000, and they're all really good guitars. They're good enough to gig with. They're good enough to record with. And you know, I've played them up against guitars 3 times their value, and they hold up. And a lot of times they outperform some of those guitars. So I think there's plenty in that sort of medium range that you can afford, where you can be, you know, a viable musician, working musician, and play those instruments. But if you want to chase the 59 Strats and Tellys, and you can find them and you can afford them, go for it, fill your boots. For me, I'd rather buy, you know, a guitar for 300-400, put the work into it, make it a really good machine that's maybe worth twice that, then go out and buy, you know, a brand new Gibson off the shelf for 3-4 grand. That's just me. So I do agree a lot with what John was saying in the video. I think that there's way too much emphasis on a very small handful of brands and a very narrow era of guitars. And there's so many things outside of that are worth finding, chasing, collecting, restoring, fixing up. And that's what this channel's all about. I mean, we've had guitars on this channel that literally cost £50 that we've seen make good guitars with decent setup and some upgrades. So I'm not saying that they're gig worthy, but you know, you can be, you know, a very successful player of any stripe and never buy a vintage Gibson and Fender. I mean, there's plenty out there where you can get a very good quality professional instrument without going to those levels. So I slightly agree on this one, but I'm very much a live and let live person. So I do. The only time I get really annoyed is the people that come on the comments, and if it's not vintage American from a certain area, they think it's all junk. They think everything made in China is crap. They think everything made in Asia is crap. I disagree with that. That is a very narrow and I think very ignorant and outdated view, and I rail against that. But there are some people that get their jollies from collecting a certain vintage of instrument. Sadly, a lot of them are collectors to the instrument, and the instruments don't get played, but it's a free world, so there's not much I can do about that. And I think the last one was rather similar. It was the guitar should sound like a guitar comment, which kind of ties in with the effects thing, but I think he was talking about guitar synthesizers. And so I'm about halfway on this. I think there are people that have used guitar synthesizers absolutely brilliantly, and there are people that use them to where they sound like cheap keyboards. They sound horrible. And, you know, trying to make a guitar play like a trumpet or a trombone or a cello is 9 times out of 10 going to fail, because it just sounds like a cheap patch on a Casio or a Yamaha keyboard or something. And it doesn't have the right texture. However, you can do interesting things with guitar synthesizers, and there are some great players that have done. I think those players are successful when they use them sparingly and interestingly and not all the time. Think of someone like Adrian Blue, who will use one in Fripp, of course, but they also use the guitar for the natural tones. They wail on them. They play, you know, beautiful acoustic music. So it's not an over-reliance. They're not constantly trying to make the guitar sound like something else. I don't own a guitar synthesizer anymore. I've dabbled with them. I, for my own playing, prefer to have a guitar sound somewhat like a guitar, although I do like playing around with some effects. If I want a cello sound, luckily I can play the cello. If I want a piano, luckily I can play a bit of piano. If I want something I can't play, I'll find someone to play it, or I'll play something similar. I don't think I would use a guitar to play a flute patch or something, you know. I've used keyboards to do that, but I don't think it would come off right with the plucking of a string to produce a breathy sound. I might be wrong, but I'm sort of in more agreement on this. I don't have much time for guitar synthesizers. However, if there was one in a shop sitting there, I'd probably muck around with it and have fun with it and see what it could do. I probably wouldn't buy it though. So I'm probably more leaning towards the boomer mentality on that than anything else. So you can see that, yes, I am a bit of a curmudgeon myself. I may not be quite as advanced as the older generation from mine, but, you know, I am somewhat of a traditionalist, perhaps with a bit more a penchant for experimentation. The one thing that I'm really different to someone like John on is that he calls himself, he admittedly refers to himself as a classic rock blues guy. And that is something I am decidedly not. Now, that's not to say I never play blues or anything classic rock sounding. I do. However, I spend a lot of my time composing outside of that, trying to compose outside of that box. So when I come up with guitar parts on my recordings, I try not to do too many typical blues riffs. I try to play in keys outside of the pentatonic scales, or use forms that take me away from blues. And you know, this is not something new. I think the whole prog rock scene in the 80s was a sort of response to everything being sort of overtaken by the blues scale. So you had a lot of bands wanting the art school guys that formed prog bands in the 70s, you know, Genesis, Van der Graaf Generator, all the you know, guys in the Canterbury scene that were doing sort of the jazz thing. They were trying to use a larger vocabulary of music than just the blues scale, whereas you had guys like Clapton and originally Beck and Page that were pretty much, you know, all blues players. So you had sort of two different approaches. I tend to gravitate to the latter. Sometimes I find blues too narrow, too, you know, it's too narrow of a language. Sometimes I want to express something outside of typical blues scales, arpeggios, formations, that kind of stuff. Although there are times in my music where I do play a blues lick and solo, so sometimes it's everything you want, isn't it? I think having a palette with many different colors is a good thing for a musician. However, some musicians like to be in a narrow box. They're interested in a particular language. I mean, you take someone like Clapton, he's just always loved the blues all his life. That's all he wants. He explores it within that paradigm. He explores the depths of it, and that's fine. You know, and there's flamenco players. They never leave flamenco, and they're absolutely brilliant, fantastic players. They stretch the medium, but they never leave it. So I think, you know, there's room for everyone. However, sometimes I get a little bit tired of guitarists with sort of the standard box of licks. And when I hear something that's different, that sounds unique, my head goes up and I become interested in that player or that band for that reason. So that's one area I will disagree a bit. I don't think of music as having a glorious 2-decade period of rock and blues and everything else outside of it is crap. I think there was great music before it. I think there's great music after it. I think you have to dig deeper and search harder now for good music. But that's on you, isn't it? You can't just declare that everything's terrible if you're not willing to dig for it. So I know I'm getting off topic with that. But as far as the synthesized sound goes, there are some people who use it tastefully, artfully. And then there are some people that their guitar always sounds like a guitar. and you're glad for it as well, because they have that beautiful tone, natural tone. So I enjoy both. There's my take on all that from a GenXer. Again, I follow a little bit in some of these traditional thought patterns, but hopefully I'm a little bit more experimental. I make fun of the boomers all the time because I come from the next generation, and I think we sort of, my generation, the Gen Xers, the whole idea is to be different, wasn't it? We came up with ska, punk, we came up with death rock, goth rock, new wave, post-punk, all that stuff, because the whole idea when we created music was to be different from what came before. Whereas I think some other generations tend to be, more interested in uniformity or creating a language or a shared value. But anyway, I hope you find that interesting. Let me know what your takes are on all this, and I'll see you on the next one.